Here is something nobody says out loud, but everyone who has studied wealth and poverty knows to be true. It is not how much you earn that determines your financial reality. It is what you do with what you have. If you cannot manage $100, you will not manage 1,000. If you cannot control small amounts, large amounts will not save you. Because money does not transform a person. It amplifies who they already are. Give financial freedom to someone with poor financial habits, and you do not produce a wealthy person. You produce the same person with larger problems. The real gap between people who build financial stability and people who remain in financial struggle is not income. It is behavior. Specifically, the daily habits of thought and action that quietly determine what happens to every dollar that passes through your hands. And the hardest part of this truth is what it implies. If the problem is behavior, then the solution is not an external change, not a raise, not a windfall, not better circumstances. The solution is internal. It is the slow, unglamorous, entirely possible work of identifying the habits that are keeping you where you are and choosing deliberately and repeatedly to do something different. That work begins with honesty, with looking at the patterns without excuses, with asking clearly and without defensiveness, which of these habits have I been living? Let's go through them one by one. The first habit that keeps you poor, spending more than you earn. This one is so common it barely registers as a problem. It has been normalized by a culture that teaches consumption over construction, that offers credit as a substitute for discipline, that presents the appearance of abundance as more desirable than the reality of it. The pattern looks like this. Income arrives. It is already committed before it lands. Subscriptions, payments, impulse purchases, small indulgences that each seem harmless but accumulate into something that leaves no margin, no buffer, no capacity to absorb the unexpected without crisis. And the most dangerous aspect of this habit is not the money it costs. It is the mindset it reinforces. Every time you spend what you do not have, you're practicing a relationship with money that treats it as something to consume rather than something to direct. You're training yourself to react emotionally to spending rather than decide rationally about it. You're building the habit of living at the limit, which means one unexpected expense is the difference between stability and disaster. Breaking this habit does not require a dramatic overhaul. It requires one honest decision. Before you can change where your money goes, you have to see where it is actually going. Not where you think it goes, where it actually goes. Track every expense for 7 days. Every single one. Not to judge yourself, but to see clearly. What you will find is almost always illuminating. Patterns you did not know were there. Small, consistent leaks that, added together, represent a significant amount of money going toward things that have no real return. From that clarity, one principle: before you spend, ask, does this bring me closer to the life I want or further from it? That question, practiced consistently, is the beginning of financial intelligence. Not because it answers itself dramatically, because it inserts a pause between the impulse and the action. And in that pause, a different decision becomes possible. The second habit that keeps you poor: postponing important decisions. Procrastination is comfortable. It offers the feeling of control without the risk of action. You're not doing nothing, you tell yourself. You're waiting, preparing, getting ready to move when the time is right. But the right time almost never arrives on its own. It is created by decision. And every day you wait for conditions that feel perfectly aligned is a day in which nothing changes and the gap between where you are and where you want to be stays exactly as wide as it was. Here is the mechanism. The mind generates fear around important decisions because important decisions carry real consequences. The possibility of being wrong, of losing something, of looking foolish, of taking a path that does not work out. And rather than face that possibility, the mind offers a very reasonable sounding alternative. Wait, prepare more, think it through a little longer. The moment will come when everything is clearer and the risk feels more manageable. But clarity almost never comes before action. It comes through action. The information you need to make the next decision is almost always available only after you have made the first one and begun to move. The people who build things do not wait until they feel ready. They move with what they have, gather information from the movement, and adjust. The people who stay stuck wait for a certainty that is not available in advance and call the waiting by reasonable names. Every day you postpone a decision that needs to be made, you are not saving yourself from risk. You are guaranteeing the most certain outcome of all, that nothing will change. Make one important decision today. Not all of them. One, the one you have been circling for the longest time. Take one concrete step in a direction, and let the movement generate the clarity that the waiting never could. The third habit that keeps you poor, thinking small. This one is subtle because it disguises itself as wisdom, as realism, as the mature acceptance of limits. You tell yourself you are being practical, that you're not being greedy or delusional, that you're just being honest about what is realistic for someone in your position. But what you call realism is often fear wearing a reasonable face. It is the mind protecting itself from the disappointment that comes from wanting something large and not getting it. And so it shrinks the wanting before the attempt. It sets expectations low enough that falling short does not hurt. The cost of this habit is invisible in the short term. You still function. You still work. You still go through the motions of a productive life. But your life is being organized around a vision that is smaller than what you are actually capable of. And your results will never exceed your vision. No matter how hard you work or how disciplined you become, the output of your effort is always bounded by what you believe is possible. Here is what this means in practice. Your external life is a reflection of your internal expectations, not your wishes. Your expectations, the quiet, underlying sense of what you actually believe will happen, what you deserve, what is realistic for someone like you. Change those expectations, and you change what you notice, what you pursue, what you attempt, what you are willing to invest in. The world does not change, but your perception of what is available within it changes dramatically. Think bigger, not as an act of arrogance, as an act of honesty about your actual potential, not what is comfortable, what is possible, and then let that larger vision begin to organize your decisions. The fourth habit that keeps you poor, waiting to feel motivated before you act. Motivation is unreliable. This is not a criticism. It is a fact about how human psychology works. Motivation is a feeling, and feelings fluctuate. They depend on sleep, on what happened yesterday, on whether you ate well, on 100 variables that have nothing to do with your goals. On good days, motivation is abundant, and the work feels meaningful, and the effort feels worth it. On bad days, motivation is nowhere, and the voice that says, "What is the point?" is very loud. If your progress depends on motivation, then your progress will be inconsistent at best and non-existent at worst. Because the days when you need the work most are almost always the days when motivation is least available. Discipline is different. Discipline is not a feeling. It is a decision that does not require a feeling to be implemented. It is the habit of doing what needs to be done regardless of how you feel about doing it. Not because feelings do not matter, because your future matters more than your mood. Here is the thing most people do not understand about discipline. You do not wait to develop it and then begin acting. You develop it by acting. Every time you do the work without relying on motivation, every time you follow through on a commitment you made to yourself when the feeling has passed, you're building the capacity for discipline. You're training the part of yourself that does not negotiate with comfort. And over time, something remarkable happens. The actions that once required enormous effort become routine, not because they stop being demanding, but because you have become someone who does them. The identity shifts. You stop being someone who tries to be disciplined and start being someone who is. Act first. The motivation will follow the action. It almost always does, but it will not precede it. The fifth habit that keeps you poor: surrounding yourself with people who do not challenge you to grow. Your environment shapes you more than your intentions do. This is not a comfortable truth. It suggests that the company you keep is not just a reflection of who you are, but an active force in determining who you become. And for most people, their closest circle is not made up of people who are consistently pushing them to grow. It is made up of people who are comfortable. People whose standards, assumptions, and expectations have become familiar. Whose ceiling has become your reference point. Whose relationship with ambition, with effort, with the possibility of a different kind of life, quietly shapes your own. You absorb the standards of the people around you without noticing it. The things they accept as normal become normal to you. The level of effort they consider sufficient becomes your baseline. The size of the goals they pursue begins to calibrate your sense of what is worth attempting. If you're consistently surrounded by people who are not growing, who are not attempting, who have made peace with less than their potential, you will find it progressively harder to maintain a different standard for yourself. Not because they're doing anything wrong, because the gravity of environment is stronger than most people acknowledge. This does not mean abandoning everyone in your life who is not operating at peak performance. But it does mean being deliberate about whose voice has authority over your sense of what is possible. Seeking out, actively and consistently, the company of people who are building something, whose conversations expand your sense of what is achievable, whose presence reminds you that the life you're trying to build is not a fantasy, but a real possibility. If that community is not physically available to you right now, it is available in books, in a documented lives, and thinking of people who built something real. Let those voices have the same access to your mind that your immediate environment does. Protect what enters your thinking. It is the most important real estate you have. The sixth habit that keeps you poor: living without clear goals. Effort without direction does not produce progress. It produces exhaustion. Most people are not lazy. They work. They try. They expend real energy on real activity. But the activity is not organized around a clear destination. It is responsive, reactive, shaped by what is most urgent at any given moment rather than what is most important in the larger arc of the life they are trying to build. The result of this is a particular kind of fatigue. The fatigue of someone who is always busy but never moving in a direction that feels meaningful. Who looks back at a week or a month or a year and cannot clearly say what it was for, what it built, where it moved them. Clear goals change the quality of every day, not because they make the work easier, but because they give the work a context that sustains effort. They filter decisions. When you know exactly where you are going, the question of what to do with your time and energy becomes much simpler. Does this move me toward the goal or away from it? That one question, applied consistently, is more powerful than any productivity system. But the goals must be specific. Not I want to improve my finances, but I will save a specific amount by a specific date for a specific purpose. Not I want to be healthier, but I will do a specific thing on specific days to produce a specific result. Vague goals produce vague effort. Specific goals produce directed action. Write your goals, not once, regularly. Read them back to yourself. Let them become the organizing principle of your daily decisions. Let them determine what gets your best energy and what gets whatever is left. Without them, you are navigating without a map. With them, every day has a destination. The seventh habit that keeps you poor: stopping learning. The world changes constantly. The skills, knowledge, and perspectives that were sufficient 5 years ago are not sufficient today. And in an environment that is always changing, the person who stops learning is not standing still. They are falling behind. This is not about formal education. It is about the commitment to continuous growth, to remaining curious, to treating the question of what else I can learn as one that never has a final answer. Most people stop learning not because they consciously decide to, but because they stop making it a priority. Life fills in. Time gets consumed by the immediate and the habitual. The hours that could be spent reading, listening, thinking, exploring are given instead to entertainment, to passive consumption, to the path of least cognitive resistance. And the cost is invisible at first. Nothing breaks. Nothing stops working. But the gap widens between what you know and what is available to know, between the capability you currently have and the capability that better results would require. And at some point, that gap becomes the difference between opportunity and exclusion, between being able to adapt and being left behind by a world that changed while you were not paying attention. 15 minutes of genuine learning each day compounds dramatically over a year. Over 5 years, the person who has committed to consistent learning is a fundamentally different thinker than the person who stopped. They have access to different ideas, different frameworks, different ways of seeing problems and possibilities. And that difference translates directly into different decisions, different results, different lives. Make learning non-negotiable, not as a burden, but as the simplest possible investment in your own future. The returns, compounded over time, are extraordinary. There is one more habit worth naming, even though it did not make the original list, because it is the one that holds all the others in place. Blaming everything outside yourself for where you are. The economy, the system, the upbringing, the bad luck, the people who did not help when they should have. All the external factors that are genuinely real, that genuinely made things harder, that genuinely were not your fault. Here is the problem with blame. Even when it is accurate, it is useless. It may correctly identify a cause, but it cannot produce a solution, because the solution requires action, and blame points the energy for action in the wrong direction. Outward toward something you cannot change, rather than inward toward the one thing you always can. When you locate the cause of your situation entirely outside yourself, you simultaneously locate the solution there too. And now you are waiting for the economy to improve, for the system to change, for the people who wronged you to make it right, for the circumstances to become favorable enough that movement feels possible. That wait is indefinite, because those conditions are not under your control. Responsibility is different from blame. Blame asks who caused this. Responsibility asks what I can do with this. Blame is backward-looking. Responsibility is forward-moving. Blame produces helplessness. Responsibility produces agency. You may not have caused everything in your life, but you're responsible for your response to it. Always, without exception. And that responsibility, accepted fully, is not a burden. It is the most liberating thing available to you, because it means that your future is not hostage to what has already happened. It is determined by what you choose to do from here. The moment you stop waiting for something outside you to change before you will change, you have access to every resource your situation actually contains. The options become visible that the blame posture was hiding. The steps that were always available appear. Take responsibility, not for everything that happened to you, for everything you do with it. Now let's step back and look at what these habits have in common, because there is a pattern here that is more important than any individual habit. Every one of these habits keeps you poor not primarily because of what it costs financially. It keeps you poor because of what it costs you in terms of who you are becoming. The person who consistently spends more than they earn is not just losing money. They're building an identity organized around immediate gratification. The person who consistently postpones decisions is not just losing time. They're training themselves to be someone who does not act. The person who thinks small is not just limiting their income. They're limiting their entire sense of what their life can be. These habits, practiced daily, become character. And character, once formed, becomes destiny. The reverse is also true. Every time you make a different choice, every time you act from discipline instead of impulse, every time you move toward the discomfort of growth instead of the comfort of staying the same, you're building a different kind of character. A character organized around something more durable than the feeling of the moment. That character, accumulated over time, produces a different life. Not through luck, not through circumstance, through the simple, unavoidable logic of who you have become through your daily choices. The question worth sitting with honestly is this: which of these habits are currently part of your daily life? Not the ones you intend to break, the ones you are actually living with right now. Because the first step in changing any of them is seeing them clearly, without defense, without the softening of good intentions. Just the honest inventory of where you actually are. From that honesty, the work begins. One decision at a time, one day at a time. But I want to leave you with something more than a list of habits to change. Because breaking individual habits without addressing what is underneath them produces temporary results. You change one behavior for a while and then drift back. You improve one area and find the old patterns reasserting themselves in another. The reason is that habits are not the root. Identity is. You behave consistently with who you believe you are, not who you want to be, who you actually believe yourself to be in the quiet, honest moments when no one is watching and no performance is required. If you believe, at some level, that you are the kind of person who struggles financially, that belief will organize your behavior in ways you will not always notice. It will find reasons to spend impulsively. It will generate hesitation before important decisions. It will make small thinking feel like wisdom. It will create the resistance to discipline that keeps arriving just when you thought you had it handled. The deepest work in breaking these habits is not the work of changing behavior. It is the work of changing the story you tell yourself about who you are. You are not someone who is poor and trying to become less poor. You are someone who is building, someone who manages resources with intention, someone who makes decisions from clarity rather than impulse, someone who grows continuously, someone who takes responsibility without excuses. That is not a fantasy about a future version of yourself. It is a choice about how you identify yourself today. An identity, once genuinely chosen, reshapes behavior more reliably than willpower ever could. Start there, and it is entirely possible. If this video moved something in you, if something you heard today made you stop and think, like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe to the channel. There is so much more to explore together. See you in the next one.